To watch every news story from Westbound Hearts First, subscribe now. Snow blanketed the valley in silence as a horse-drawn wagon pulled into the small town square. Mira stood stiffly beside her father, her thin coat barely enough to shield her from the cold. Her hands trembled, not from the wind, but from the shame burning in her veins. "She's no use to us," her father muttered to the stranger on horseback. "Can't bear children. The doctor said so. A burden, nothing more." The stranger didn't say a word at first. He was tall, wrapped in a thick fur coat, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his eyes. Behind him, a wooden sled carried sacks of grain, bundles of firewood, and one empty seat. "How much?" the man asked quietly. "A year's worth of food, or a horse, if you got one to spare." The man dismounted, reached into the sled, and pulled out a thick woolen blanket. He draped it around Myra's shoulders. "She's not a thing," he said, his voice low and rough. "But I'll take her. Not for breeding. For warmth." Mira said nothing. She didn't ask who he was or where he was taking her. She didn't even cry. She simply climbed into the sled and didn't look back. His name was Elias Granger, a lumberjack, a man with no wife, no neighbors, and 4 small children living in a cabin deep in the woods, tucked between the pines like a secret. His eldest was 10. The youngest was barely 3. He didn't speak much on the way home. The path was long, winding through frozen rivers and narrow ravines. But when she shivered, he offered her another blanket. When she coughed, he slowed the horses. At the cabin, the children peered from the frosted windows. Mira stepped inside and was hit by warmth, not just from the fire, but from the way the children ran to their father, wrapping their arms around his legs. "This is Mira," he said simply. "She'll be staying." No one asked why. Elias gave her the spare room and left her alone that first night. The walls were bare, the window crusted with ice, but the bed was warm, the sheets clean. That was more kindness than she'd known in months. The days passed quietly. Mira cooked, cleaned, sewed, and tended the children while Elias spent his days felling trees and hauling lumber. He barely spoke, but when he did, it was never cruel. He asked if she had enough to eat, if the children gave her trouble, if the fire burned long enough through the night. She nodded, always nodded. Words felt too heavy in her throat. But there were whispers in the town about the man in the woods who had taken in another woman. They said his wife had died under strange circumstances, that she had hung herself from the beam in the cellar, that Elias had buried her quietly, without ceremony, and never spoke her name again. Mira tried not to listen, but the cellar door beneath the cabin creaked in her dreams. A wooden trapdoor tucked beneath the rug. She never dared open it. One afternoon, while Elias was away, Mrs. Calloway, the older woman who delivered milk, pulled Mira aside. "Do you know what happened to the last woman who lived here?" she whispered. Mira shook her head. "Neither do we. That's the problem." She smiled kindly, but there was fear in her eyes. "Watch yourself, dear. Grief does strange things to men, especially the quiet ones." Mira didn't sleep that night. The floorboards creaked too loud. The wind sounded like weeping through the trees. And yet, Elias never touched her, never even entered her room. The children loved her. Little Annie clung to her skirts, and Jack carved her wooden figures. The cabin, for all its dark corners, had begun to feel like safety. Still, the questions haunted her. What if she was just another shadow in a long line of women Elias had buried under the snow? One night, after Elias had gone into town, Mira found herself staring at the trapdoor. Her heart pounded as she pulled the rug aside. She lifted the door. Darkness yawned beneath her. A steep ladder led into a narrow root cellar, its air thick with dust and cold. She climbed down. Shelves of preserves lined the walls, crates of potatoes and dried meat. But in the far corner sat a locked chest, and beside it a bundle of cloth. She approached slowly. It was a dress, old, torn at the collar, covered in dust, and a diary. She hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was delicate, elegant, the pages yellowed with time. "Elias doesn't speak much anymore. He's distant, cold. I think he regrets marrying me. I can't give him children. I think he resents that. Myra's throat tightened. I told him the doctor said I'd never carry. He didn't yell, just went silent for 3 days. When he finally spoke, he asked if I'd still help with the homestead, like I was a maid. The last entry was smeared. If I'd disappear, I want someone to know I tried. I loved him, even if he only ever loved the forest. Mira closed the book, her hands trembling. She couldn't tell if the woman had run away, or she didn't want to think it. That night, Elias found her sitting by the fire, the diary clutched to her chest. He froze in the doorway, his face unreadable. "You opened it," he said quietly. "I had to," she whispered. She was like me. No children. Afraid. Alone. He walked to the hearth, sat across from her. The silence between them stretched like a canyon. "I found her hanging," he finally said, voice cracking. "I was gone too long. The snow kept me back. When I came home," he didn't finish. "She thought you hated her," Mira said softly. "I didn't. I just didn't know how to talk to her anymore. I thought if I kept going, chopping trees, building things, I wouldn't break." He looked at her then, really looked. I never blamed her. I blamed myself. Mira felt the tears she'd buried for years finally rise. "My father sold me because I can't have children." Elias reached out, hesitated, then took her hand, rough and calloused, but warm. "I didn't bring you here to be a wife, or a mother. I brought you here because you looked like you needed saving. And maybe I did too." She didn't pull her hand away. Days passed, then weeks. The snow melted. Spring came in shy sunlight. Mira planted herbs outside the cabin. Elias fixed the porch swing. He carved her a wooden pendant. She made the children new coats. They never spoke of love, not directly, but in the way Elias brushed snow from her hair, in the way she patched the hole in his coat, in the way he waited for her to sit before serving himself at dinner. The town kept its distance. Sheriff Nolan came once, asking questions. But when he saw Mira with the children, how they clung to her, how she smiled, he tipped his hat and walked away. One morning, Elias stood on the porch, holding a box in his hands. "I know you weren't given a choice before," he said, "so I won't ask again unless you want me to." He opened the box. Inside was a simple iron ring, handmade, beautiful in its honesty. "I want you to stay, as long as you want, with no promises but this. I'll never let anyone sell you again. You're not something to be owned. You're someone to be loved." Mira didn't speak. She just slipped the ring onto her own finger, and for the first time, she smiled like someone who belonged. It had been nearly a year since Mira had stepped foot into Elias Granger's cabin, carried on a sled like cargo and wrapped in silence. But now she was part of it, part of the creaking wood floors, the morning scent of pine and bread, the children's laughter echoing through the valley. And Elias, the man once buried in silence, now smiled when she passed, waited for her before he sat at dinner, touched her hand without fear. Mira had begun to live. She no longer thought of the past, the cold faces of her parents, the shame they carved into her for being empty. Here, she wasn't empty. She was full of life, of purpose, of a quiet love that never needed grand declarations. But peace on the frontier was a fragile thing. It started with tracks in the snow. Elias returned from the woods, jaw tight, brow furrowed. "Someone's been watching the ridge," he muttered. "Boot prints. Not mine. Not the kids. Too heavy to be a hunter." Myra's stomach twisted. Could it be a traveler? Maybe, maybe not. That night, Elias stayed awake by the fire, rifle in hand. The children didn't notice. But Mira did. And by dawn, the tracks were gone, wiped clean by fresh snow. 3 days later, the first letter came, folded into their woodshed door, held by a hunting knife. A single piece of paper. The ink smudged, but the words still clear. "She's mine." Elias stood still as he read it, then passed it silently to Mira. Her face turned pale. "It's my father's handwriting," she whispered. The world tilted. "Are you sure?" She nodded, eyes burning. "He always said if I ever tried to run, he'd find me. He must have tracked me through town. He must know where I am. Elias's jaw clenched. Let him come, he growled. This is your home now. He's not taking you back. But Mira knew better. Her father wasn't a man of warnings. He was a man of action. Brutal, cold. The kind of man who could sell his own daughter for food and not blink twice. A week passed with no sign. Then, too, the snow began to melt. Mira tried to pretend everything was normal. She cooked, tended the garden, taught Annie to read. Elias acted calm, but his rifle was always near, and he never let the children play outside alone. Then came the fire. It started in the woodshed, late at night. By the time Elias burst through the back door with buckets, the flames were already licking the edges of the fence. Mira rushed the children out, blankets wrapped around them, tears in their eyes. Elias and Mira managed to put it out, barely, but the message was clear. He was close. The next morning, Sheriff Nolan arrived. Found a campfire in the East Ridge, he said. Abandoned. Boot prints everywhere. Looked like someone had been watching your cabin for days. Elias nodded grimly. It's Myra's father. He wants her back. Nolan turned to Mira. You want me to arrest him if he shows? Mira hesitated. Then, no, I want to face him. Elias looked at her sharply, but she stood tall. If I run again, he wins. I want him to see who I am now, what I've become. And so they waited. On the third morning, he came. He didn't knock. He just stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, eyes cold as stone. Mira, he barked, get your things. You're coming with me. She stood in the doorway, Elias beside her, his arm lightly touching hers. I'm not going anywhere, she said, voice shaking. This is my home now. You're a liar, her father snapped. You belong to me. You think that man loves you? He only took you because you were cheap, a broken thing. You think he'll want you once he sees what you really are. Elias stepped forward. I saw what she was the day I met her, he said. She was brave. She was hurt, but not weak. She loved my children before she ever trusted me. She saved my family. And if you take one more step toward her, I'll bury you in the woods you came from. Myra's father raised his rifle. So did Elias. For a breathless second, the world held still. Then a shout rang out. Papa! Jack cried, running from the trees with a bundle of firewood. The boy's voice startled Myra's father. He turned just slightly, and that was enough. Elias knocked the rifle from his hands and shoved him back against the porch rail. You ever threaten this family again, Elias growled, and I'll make sure no one finds your bones. Sheriff Nolan, who'd been waiting quietly down the trail, stepped forward and placed his hand on Myra's father's shoulder. That's enough, he said. Time for you to leave. Her father was escorted out of the valley that morning. He didn't look back, and neither did Mira. That night, the cabin was quiet again. Elias sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Mira sat beside him, her hand finding his. I thought I'd have to face him alone, she whispered. You never will, Elias said. Not while I breathe. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. What if he comes back? Then we'll face him. Together. Silence settled over them like a blanket. Then Elias turned to her, his voice almost a whisper. I never asked, but I want to. Do you want to marry me, Mira? She looked at him, tears in her eyes. I thought I already had. He smiled that rare, quiet smile that made the coldest nights feel warm. And in the flickering firelight, they kissed. Not like people saving each other, but like two hearts that had finally stopped running.